I stood on the doorstep clutching the carefully wrapped vintage baseball cards. These treasures had belonged to my father, and today my grandson Thomas would finally be old enough to appreciate them on his 5th birthday. The door swung open, but instead of my son's welcoming face, my daughter-in-law Stephanie stood blocking the entrance, arms crossed. "You're not welcome here, Griffin," she said with cold finality. "You're not family anymore." The door slammed in my face, leaving me frozen in shock, holding the gift that would never be opened. At 68 years old, I never imagined I would be standing outside my own son's home, feeling like a stranger. After retiring from a 40-year career as an architect, I had hoped to spend my golden years surrounded by family, especially after losing my wife Amanda to cancer 8 years ago. The grief had been overwhelming, but Jackson, my only son, had been my rock through it all. Jackson followed in my footsteps and became an architect too. We had always been close, working together on projects for several years before I retired. We shared a passion for creating spaces that brought people together, that fostered connection and belonging. The irony of being shut out of his life now wasn't lost on me. Everything changed when Jackson met Stephanie at a property showing 3 years ago. He had designed a modern home in the suburbs, and she was the real estate agent handling the sale. According to Jackson, there was an immediate spark. Stephanie was attractive, confident, and ambitious. At 38, she had built a successful career, selling high-end properties, and had a reputation for closing difficult deals. Their romance was a whirlwind. Within 6 months, Jackson proposed. I was initially thrilled for him. After watching him struggle through a series of unsuccessful relationships in his 30s, I was relieved to see him so happy. When he brought Stephanie to meet me for the first time, I welcomed her with open arms, eager to embrace the woman who had brought joy back into my son's life. "Dad, we're thinking of a small wedding," Jackson told me during that first dinner at my house. "Just close family and friends." "That sounds perfect," I said, raising my glass in a toast. "To new beginnings." Stephanie smiled, but there was something calculated in her expression. "Actually, I've always dreamed of a wedding at the Grand Hotel downtown. It's such a magnificent venue." Jackson looked surprised. "I thought we agreed on something intimate?" "Well, yes, but intimate doesn't have to mean small," she countered, placing her hand over his. "Don't you think your father would enjoy seeing you get married somewhere special?" That was the first time I noticed how Stephanie could subtly redirect Jackson, making it seem like her ideas were actually his, or for his benefit. Over the next few months, as wedding plans progressed, the small ceremony ballooned into an elaborate affair with 200 guests, most of whom I had never met. I offered to help financially, knowing Jackson had just invested in a new business partnership. "I'd be honored to contribute," I told them. It's tradition for the father of the groom to cover certain expenses. Stephanie's parents were wealthy from what I understood, but they contributed minimally. Instead, I found myself paying for nearly 80% of the wedding costs. I didn't mind, really. I had saved for years, planning to help Jackson when he needed it, and seeing him happy was worth every penny. The wedding planning revealed more warning signs. Stephanie began changing family traditions, insisting on new approaches that often minimized my role. When I suggested incorporating a special reading that had been part of our family weddings for generations, Stephanie smiled politely before explaining it wouldn't fit with her vision. On the wedding day itself, I noticed I was seated at a table far from the main party, with distant acquaintances rather than close family. Throughout the reception, I barely spoke with Jackson or Stephanie. They were constantly surrounded by her friends and family, while I sat watching from afar, feeling increasingly isolated. After the honeymoon, I hoped things would normalize. Our Sunday dinner tradition had been a cornerstone of our relationship since Jackson moved out on his own. For years, he would come over every Sunday evening, and we would cook together, share a meal, and talk about our week. Sometimes he brought friends or girlfriends, but the tradition remained constant. Within 2 months of the wedding, these dinners became increasingly rare. Stephanie always had reasons they couldn't make it: work commitments, social obligations with her friends, fatigue. When they did come, Stephanie dominated the conversation, often cutting me off mid-sentence or dismissing my contributions with subtle eye rolls or sighs. Still, I maintained a positive outlook. I kept inviting them, sending thoughtful messages and trying to connect. I wanted this relationship to work, not just for my sake, but for Jackson's. I could see how much he loved her, and I wanted to respect that bond. Then came their first wedding anniversary. I had arranged for them to enjoy a dinner at the Oak Tree, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. I paid for the full evening in advance, including a special dessert and champagne service. I imagined them celebrating their love, toasting to many more happy years together. A week later, I was scrolling through social media when I saw Stephanie's post. Amazing anniversary dinner at the Oak Tree, so blessed. The photos showed them smiling, toasting with the champagne I had purchased. What struck me wasn't the images themselves, but the realization that they hadn't mentioned the dinner to me at all. No thank you call, no acknowledgement that I had arranged it, not even a message letting me know they had enjoyed themselves. It was as if I had ceased to exist beyond my financial contributions to their happiness. That was the moment I first felt the cold reality of my new place in their lives, not as family, but as a resource to be used and then ignored. After discovering they hadn't acknowledged my anniversary gift, I decided to try a different approach. Perhaps a more personal connection would help bridge the growing distance between us. I invited Jackson and Stephanie to my home for a special dinner, spending the entire day preparing Jackson's childhood favorites. My famous pot roast with garlic mashed potatoes, fresh bread, and his mother's apple cobbler recipe for dessert. When they arrived, Jackson seemed genuinely touched. "Dad, you made all my favorites," he said, giving me a warm hug. "I thought it would be nice to share some family traditions with Stephanie," I replied, hoping to create a sense of inclusion. The evening started pleasantly enough, but as we sat down to eat, the dynamics quickly shifted. Every story I began about Jackson's childhood was interrupted by Stephanie. "Speaking of childhood homes," she said, cutting me off mid-anecdote about Jackson's first architecture project, "we've been thinking it's time to look for a house of our own. The apartment is getting cramped." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely excited at this development. "Are you thinking of staying in this area?" "We've been looking at Maple Ridge," Jackson said. "It's a bit farther out, but the schools are exceptional," Stephanie interjected. "And that's becoming more important now." There was a pause, and Jackson looked at her with a smile that told me they were sharing a special moment. "Dad," Jackson said, turning to me with evident joy, "we're having a baby. Stephanie's pregnant." The news hit me like a wave of pure happiness. A grandchild. Amanda would have been overjoyed. I stood up immediately, tears welling in my eyes, and embraced them both. "This is the most wonderful news," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I can't tell you how happy this makes me." For a brief, shining moment, we were truly family again. Jackson looked as happy as I'd ever seen him, and even Stephanie seemed genuinely moved by my reaction. We spent the next hour discussing due dates, doctor appointments, and their hopes for the baby. "Have you thought about names?" I asked. "Thomas for a boy, after my father," Stephanie said definitively, "and Sophia for a girl." I nodded, though I had secretly hoped they might consider Amanda's name if it was a girl. I kept this thought to myself, not wanting to disrupt the harmony of the moment. "I still have the cradle that Jackson slept in as a baby," I offered. "My father made it by hand, and I've kept some of Jackson's baby clothes and toys in perfect condition." Stephanie's smile faltered slightly. "That's thoughtful, Griffin, but we'll need new things. Those old items probably don't meet current safety standards, and honestly, they're likely full of dust, and who knows what else after all these years. Not exactly hygienic for a newborn." "I understand," I said, though the dismissal stung. "The offer stands if you change your mind." As the pregnancy progressed, I found myself making increasing efforts to please Stephanie. I wanted to be involved in my grandchild's life, and it was becoming clear that Stephanie was the gatekeeper. I sent thoughtful gifts, offered to help with preparations, and always asked about her comfort and health when we spoke. When it came time for the baby shower, I immediately offered to host it at my home. "That's very kind," Stephanie said during one of our increasingly rare phone conversations, "but Brenda has already offered to host at her house. She has that beautiful sunroom, and it's closer to most of our friends." Brenda was Stephanie's best friend, someone I had met briefly at the wedding but knew little about. I tried not to show my disappointment. "Of course, whatever makes things easier for you," I said. "Just let me know how I can help." The baby shower was held on a sunny Saturday afternoon. I arrived with several carefully chosen gifts and a check to help with the nursery furnishings. From the moment I walked in, I felt like an outsider. The room was filled with Stephanie's friends and family, women chatting animatedly about pregnancy and child-rearing. Stephanie's parents held court near their daughter, while I found myself relegated to a chair in the corner, barely acknowledged. During a lull in the festivities, I excused myself to use the restroom. As I passed the guest bedroom, I heard Stephanie's voice from inside. The door was slightly ajar, and I could tell she was on the phone. "Yes, Mom, he's here," she was saying, her voice carrying a tone I'd never heard her use around me. "That annoying old man we're stuck with forever." I froze, knowing I should walk away but unable to move. I know, she continued. "Once the baby comes, we'll have to be more strategic. I don't want Thomas spending too much time with him. He'll just confuse Thomas about who's really important in his life." The words hit me like physical blows. Annoying old man, stuck with forever. Plans to limit my relationship with my own grandchild. I backed away quietly, my hands trembling as I found the actual bathroom. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized the hurt in my own eyes. For the remainder of the shower, I maintained a pleasant facade, but inside, something had shifted. The casual cruelty in Stephanie's words revealed a truth I had been avoiding. This wasn't just a difficult relationship that needed work. There was an active effort to diminish my role in Jackson and the baby's life. As I drove home afterward, alone with my thoughts, I wondered how to proceed. Should I confront Jackson? Would he even believe me? Or would it only push him further away? With the baby coming, I decided to bide my time. Perhaps when Thomas arrived, things would naturally improve. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it would only grow stronger in the months to come. The call came at 2:30 in the morning, pulling me from a deep sleep. Jackson's voice was breathless with excitement and anxiety. "Dad, it's happening. Stephanie's water broke. We're heading to the hospital." I was dressed and in my car within 10 minutes, heart pounding with anticipation. My grandchild was coming into the world. Despite everything that had happened, this moment transcended the tensions and disappointments of the past months. The hospital waiting room was already occupied when I arrived. Stephanie's parents, Walter and Diana Davis, sat rigidly in matching Navy outfits, looking both nervous and somehow disapproving of my presence. We exchanged stiff greetings before lapsing into uncomfortable silence. Hours passed. Occasionally, Jackson would emerge with updates, his face alternating between worry and elation. Each time, he spoke first to the Davises, then to me, a small but noticeable hierarchy that wasn't lost on me. Finally, at 11:27 that morning, Thomas Griffin Williams entered the world. I wept openly when Jackson came out to tell us, the pure joy overwhelming any other concerns. 7 pounds, 6 ounces, Jackson announced, accepting hugs from all of us. "He's perfect. Mom and baby are doing great." When it came time to visit the new mother and child, the Davises were invited in first. They stayed for nearly an hour while I waited patiently outside. When my turn came, Jackson led me into the room where Stephanie reclined in bed, looking tired but radiant, tiny Thomas swaddled in her arms. "Dad, meet your grandson," Jackson said, his voice breaking slightly. I approached cautiously, overwhelmed by emotion. Thomas was indeed perfect, 10 tiny fingers, a tuft of dark hair like Jackson's, and when he opened his eyes briefly, I saw a familiar shade of blue. "Would you like to hold him?" Jackson asked. Before I could answer, Stephanie interjected. "Maybe later, Jackson. He's just settled down, and the nurse said we shouldn't disturb him too much." I swallowed my disappointment and nodded understandingly. "Of course. There will be plenty of time." That moment in the hospital room captured what would become a pattern over the next 2 years. Stephanie creating barriers to my relationship with Thomas, subtle enough that Jackson often didn't notice, while I continued to make concessions to maintain peace. A week after Thomas came home, I visited with several gifts, including documents showing I had established a college fund for him with an initial deposit of $20,000. "This is incredibly generous, Dad," Jackson said, genuinely moved. "It's what grandparents do," I replied. "And I want to help in other ways, too. The first years are expensive, and with Stephanie taking time off work, we're managing," Stephanie said quickly. But I could see the financial strain in their modest apartment, now cluttered with baby equipment. "Actually," I said, "having given this considerable thought, I have a proposition that might help everyone. You know that investment property I bought on Maple Street last year? The 3-bedroom with the big backyard?" Jackson nodded. I had purchased the house as a rental property, part of my retirement investment strategy. "It's vacant right now, and it would be perfect for a growing family. The neighborhood is excellent, and there's a great elementary school nearby. I could rent it to you at well below market rate. It would give you more space and help with your expenses." The offer hung in the air for a moment. I could see Jackson and Stephanie exchanging glances, having one of those silent conversations couples develop. "That's an incredible offer, Dad," Jackson finally said. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. Family helps family." I looked directly at Stephanie as I said this, wondering if she caught the subtle reminder of her own words about who constituted real family. To my surprise, Stephanie was enthusiastic. "That would be amazing, Griffin. Thank you." The transition happened quickly. I helped them move in, even bringing my tools to make small repairs and improvements around the house. The most gratifying project was designing and setting up Thomas's nursery. Jackson and I worked together, painting the walls a soft blue, assembling furniture, and creating a space that was both functional and beautiful. For a while, things seemed better. Living in my property created a natural connection that Stephanie couldn't easily sever. I would stop by to check on maintenance issues or drop off supplies, using these opportunities to spend time with Thomas. Watching him grow was a joy that defied description. Each smile, each new skill mastered, filled my heart in ways I hadn't experienced since Jackson was small. But by the time Thomas turned 2, the old patterns began to resurface. My scheduled visits were increasingly canceled at the last minute. Stephanie always had plausible excuses. Thomas was napping, he had a slight fever, they had unexpected visitors, or a schedule change. When I did see them, Stephanie would limit my time with Thomas, hovering nearby and frequently interrupting our interactions. "Thomas, don't touch Grandpa's glasses," she would say. Or, "Thomas, it's almost snack time, come to Mommy now." Then came my health scare. A minor heart arrhythmia sent me to the hospital for 3 days of tests and observation. Jackson was at my side immediately, genuinely concerned and attentive. Even Stephanie visited, bringing a sleeping Thomas wrapped in a blanket. For those few days, the walls between us seemed to thin, our shared concern for my well-being creating a temporary truce. After my release, with a clean bill of health and medication to manage the condition, I resolved to strengthen my relationship with my son's family. If time was potentially limited, I wanted to make the most of it. I increased my efforts to be useful, offering to babysit, bringing groceries, fixing things around the house, anything to maintain my presence in their lives. One Tuesday afternoon, I arrived earlier than expected for a scheduled visit. Thomas would be 3 in a few weeks, and I wanted to discuss gift ideas with Jackson. As I approached the front door, I heard Stephanie's voice through the open window, unusually clear in the quiet neighborhood. "Grandpa Griffin isn't really family like Grandma and Grandpa Davis," she was saying in a simplified tone one uses with small children. "He just helps Mommy and Daddy with money sometime. Real family doesn't need to be paid to be loved." I stood frozen on the path, the words sinking into me like stones dropping into a still pond. Thomas was too young to understand the manipulation, but the intent was unmistakable. Stephanie was poisoning my relationship with my grandson before it could truly form. Fighting the impulse to burst through the door and confront her, I retreated to my car, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. The casual cruelty of her words echoed in my mind. Not really family, just helps with money. Real family. I sat there for nearly 20 minutes, gathering my composure before calling Jackson to say I'd be running late. When I finally entered their home, I smiled and played with Thomas as if nothing was wrong. But inside, something fundamental had changed. The illusion that patience and generosity would eventually win Stephanie over had finally shattered. For the first time, I began to consider that maintaining access to my son and grandson might require a different approach entirely. As Thomas's 5th birthday approached, I felt a renewed sense of optimism. 5 is a significant age old enough for real conversations, for forming memories that last, for developing interests and passions. I wanted to be part of those formative experiences. In my garage, covered with a sheet, sat a project I'd been working on for weeks, a vintage pedal car that had been Jackson's favorite toy. I had spent countless hours restoring it, replacing rusted parts, repainting it a gleaming red, and ensuring it was completely safe for a modern child. Thomas had shown an interest in cars during my visits, and I could already imagine his delight when he saw it. 3 days before the party, I called to confirm the details. I had received a text invitation the previous week with just the date and time, no information about theme or gifts. The phone rang several times before Stephanie answered. "Hello, Griffin," she said, her tone immediately setting me on edge. There was none of the warmth one might expect when speaking to a close family member. "Hi, Stephanie. I'm just calling about Thomas's party on Saturday. Is there a theme I should know about? I want to make sure my gift is appropriate." A slight pause. "About that, we've decided to keep the party small this year, just immediate family." The word struck me as odd. "I understand. What time should I arrive?" Another pause, longer this time. "Griffin, when I say immediate family, I mean Thomas's parents and my parents. We feel he gets overwhelmed with too many people, and we want to keep it simple." The implication was clear, but I needed her to say it explicitly. "Are you telling me I'm not invited to my own grandson's birthday party?" "Look," Stephanie's voice hardened, "we've been meaning to talk to you about this. Thomas has been confused lately about family relationships. He needs consistency and clear boundaries right now. Your constant gifts and irregular visits are disrupting our efforts to establish a stable routine." "Irregular visits?" I repeated, incredulous. "Stephanie, you cancel half the visits we schedule. And as for gifts, is it wrong for a grandfather to want to give his grandson nice things?" "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she snapped. "You're always trying to buy Thomas's affection. Real relationships aren't built on material things." My patience finally broke. That's rich coming from someone living in my house at below market rent. If material support doesn't matter in real relationships, perhaps we should revisit that arrangement. As soon as the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Not because they weren't justified, but because I knew they would only escalate the situation. Stephanie's voice turned cold and deliberate. "This is exactly why you're not welcome at the party. You hold your financial assistance over our heads like a weapon. Well, we don't need your charity, and Thomas doesn't need a grandfather who thinks love can be purchased." "That's not fair, and you know it," I protested, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. "I've never attached strings to anything I've done for you all." "You're not family anymore, Griffin," Stephanie declared with finality. "You're just Jackson's father, and that doesn't entitle you to be part of every aspect of our lives. The party is for family only, and you're not invited. I have to go now." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I sat in stunned silence, the phone still clutched in my hand. The casual cruelty of her dismissal left me breathless. Not family anymore. The words echoed painfully, a formal exile from the lives of the people I loved most. The next day, I drove to their house, the carefully wrapped vintage baseball cards on the passenger seat beside me. These weren't just any cards. They were treasures my father had collected and passed down to me. Now Thomas was old enough to appreciate them, to learn about the history of the game, to begin a connection to a heritage that preceded even me. When Stephanie opened the door and blocked my entry, when she repeated those devastating words, "You're not family anymore," something inside me finally broke. The moment she slammed the door in my face, I knew things would never be the same. I retreated to my car, the rejected gift still in my hands, and sat there for nearly an hour, watching the house. No movement, no acknowledgement, no reconsideration, just absolute exclusion. Over the next 2 days, I called Jackson repeatedly. Each call went straight to voicemail. I left measured, calm messages. "Jackson, we need to talk about what happened. Please call me back." "Son, I don't understand what's going on. Can we please discuss this?" "Jackson, at least give me a chance to hear your side of things." No response. The day before Thomas's birthday, I drove by their house again. Colorful balloons decorated the mailbox. A happy birthday banner hung across the garage door. Preparations for a celebration I was banned from attending were in full swing. That evening, my phone finally rang. Jackson's name appeared on the screen, and relief washed over me. "Jackson, thank God. I've been so worried." "Dad." His voice sounded tired, strained. "I got your messages." "What's going on, son? Why am I suddenly persona non grata in your lives?" A long sigh. "It's complicated, Dad. Stephanie feels you've been overstepping lately." "Overstepping? By wanting to attend my grandson's birthday? By bringing him a gift?" "It's more than that. The constant advice, the way you sometimes question our parenting decisions, the lavish gifts that make our presence seem insignificant," Stephanie thinks. He hesitated. "What? What does Stephanie think? She thinks you're trying to control us through your generosity. That there are strings attached to everything you give us. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And what do you think, Jackson? Do you believe I have some ulterior motive for wanting to be part of your lives? Another pause. I think maybe you should give us some space, Dad. Stephanie thinks you're too controlling with all the gifts and constant advice. It might be better for everyone if you step back for a while. His words felt like a physical blow. My own son, the boy I had raised alone after his mother died, was choosing to push me away rather than stand up for my place in his family. I see, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. So I'm not invited tomorrow. Not this time. Let's give it some space, okay? I'll call you next week, and we can talk more. After we hung up, I sat in my darkened living room for hours, surrounded by photos of happier times. The framed picture of Jackson on my knee as a toddler. The three of us, Amanda, Jackson, and me, at his college graduation. A recent photo of Thomas sitting on my lap, both of us laughing at some forgotten joke. The isolation was complete. I had been cast out of my son's family by a woman who seemed determined to erase me from their lives, and Jackson had chosen the path of least resistance rather than confronting the injustice of it. For the first time since Amanda's death, I felt truly alone. But beneath the hurt and rejection, something else was building. A resolve to fight for my place in my son's and grandson's lives. If Stephanie wanted a battle, she would get one. But it would be fought on my terms, with truth and principle as my weapons. The morning after Thomas's birthday, I woke with a sense of purpose that had been missing for months. The hurt remained, a dull ache beneath my breastbone, but it was now accompanied by clarity. I needed perspective, someone who could see the situation objectively. I called Bill Carson, my attorney and friend of 30 years. We had met when I designed his firm's office building, and over the decades our professional relationship had evolved into a deep friendship. If anyone could help me make sense of this mess, it was Bill. We agreed to meet at Rosie's Diner, a local institution where we had shared countless meals over the years. Bill arrived looking exactly as he always did, meticulously dressed in a tweed jacket, his white hair neatly combed, reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. "Griffin," he greeted me warmly, sliding into the booth. "You sounded troubled on the phone. What's going on?" Over coffee and Rosie's famous apple pie, I recounted the entire situation from the early warning signs after Jackson and Stephanie's wedding to the birthday party ban. Bill listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly allowing me to talk without interruption. When I finished, he removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose, a habit when he was thinking deeply. "That's a difficult situation, Griffin. Family disputes are always complex. I don't know what to do, Bill. I feel like I'm losing my son and my grandson, and I don't understand why. I've only ever tried to help them." Bill nodded thoughtfully, then asked a question that would change everything. "That house they're living in, what exactly was the arrangement?" I explained how I had offered them the property at below-market rent to help with their expenses after Thomas was born. "Was there a formal rental agreement? Documents signed?" I hesitated, realizing where he was going. "No, it was a verbal agreement between family. I told them they could live there at reduced rent to help them save for their own place eventually. So legally, you still own the property outright, and they are effectively month-to-month tenants without a formal lease." Bill's legal mind was already working through the implications. "Yes, but I would never use that against them. It's Thomas's home." Bill leaned forward. "Griffin, I'm not suggesting you evict your son and his family, but it might be worth reviewing the property documents, just so you're clear on exactly where things stand legally. Knowledge is power, and right now, you need all the power you can get." After lunch, I went home and dug through my files, locating all the documents related to the Maple Street property. Bill was right, I was still the legal owner, paying the property taxes and insurance. There was no formal rental agreement, just my verbal offer of reduced rent in exchange for them handling minor repairs and maintenance. What surprised me was a notation in my accounting records. Over the past 2 years, there had been several months when Jackson and Stephanie had paid no rent at all. I had been lenient, understanding they had a young child and expenses, but seeing the pattern laid out in black and white was revealing. They had accepted my generosity, while simultaneously pushing me out of their lives. The next day, I did something I had never considered before. I checked Stephanie's social media accounts. We weren't connected online, she had never accepted my friend request, but many of her posts were public. What I found disturbed me deeply. Over the past year, Stephanie had been subtly portraying me as controlling and manipulative. There were vague posts about toxic family members and setting boundaries with difficult people, all carefully worded to avoid direct accusations but clear enough that anyone who knew us would understand the reference. One post particularly caught my attention. Some people think they can buy their way into your life. Real family respects boundaries and doesn't need to be the center of attention. It had been posted the day after I had brought Thomas a toy fire truck he had admired in a store window. As I dug deeper, a pattern emerged. Stephanie was systematically rewriting our family narrative, casting herself and her parents as the supportive, loving family while painting me as an intrusive outsider, trying to force my way in through financial manipulation. The investigation took another turn when I ran into Paul Reynolds, Jackson's childhood friend, at the hardware store. We chatted briefly, and I mentioned I hadn't seen Jackson recently. "Yeah, I've been meaning to call you about that," Paul said, looking uncomfortable. "I had dinner with Jackson and Stephanie last month, and some things were said that didn't sit right with me." "What kind of things?" I asked, a sense of dread growing. Paul shifted awkwardly. "Stephanie mentioned you were becoming forgetful. She said you'd been making some concerning financial decisions, and they were worried about your ability to manage your affairs." "What?" I was stunned. "That's completely false. I'm sharp as ever, and my finances are in perfect order." "I figured as much," Paul nodded. "I've known you my whole life, and you've always been the most meticulous person I know. That's why it seemed off to me." This revelation was more alarming than anything I had discovered so far. Stephanie wasn't just pushing me away. She was actively working to discredit me, to suggest I was becoming senile and financially irresponsible. That evening, I organized all my financial records going back 5 years. Tax returns, investment statements, property documents, everything that demonstrated my continued financial acumen. If Stephanie was spreading rumors about my mental decline, I wanted to be prepared to disprove them conclusively. As I reviewed the documents, another realization struck me. In all our conversations about the house, I had never explicitly told Jackson that I still owned it outright. I had mentioned it was my investment property and offered them reduced rent, but I now suspected Jackson might have misunderstood the arrangement. Perhaps he believed my help with the down payment had been a partial transfer of ownership, that they were building equity in the property rather than simply renting from me. This misunderstanding, if it existed, could explain some of the tension. If Jackson thought they partially owned the home already, Stephanie's resentment of my financial control would make more sense. I was contemplating how to approach this delicate topic when fate intervened. The following Tuesday, I had a lunch meeting with a prospective client at the Capitol Grill. As I waited in the lobby, I overheard a familiar voice. Turning slightly, I saw James Wilson, one of Stephanie's colleagues from her real estate office, speaking with another agent. "Stephanie's playing it smart," James was saying. "She told me they're planning to have the house transferred fully to their names before Thomas starts school. Something about securing their future against Griffin's unpredictable behavior." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. Stephanie was actively planning to convince Jackson they should have the house transferred to them, using my supposed mental decline as justification. The pieces suddenly fit together with terrible clarity. The campaign to paint me as unstable and controlling, the effort to distance me from Jackson and Thomas, the gradual erosion of my place in their family. It wasn't just about control or personal dislike. Stephanie had a concrete financial motive for pushing me out of their lives. I left the restaurant without meeting my client, driving directly to Bill's office. I needed legal advice, but more importantly, I needed a friend who could help me see through the fog of betrayal and hurt to find a path forward that would protect both my relationship with my son and grandson and my financial interests. As painful as the discoveries had been, they had given me something essential: understanding. I now knew what I was facing, and knowledge, as Bill had said, was power. The question was how to use that power not for revenge, but for restoration, to reclaim my place in my family without destroying relationships in the process. Bill's office had always felt like a sanctuary to me. The oak-paneled walls, leather-bound law books, and subtle scent of pipe tobacco created an atmosphere of stability and reason. Today, I needed both desperately. "This changes things," Bill said after I explained what I had overheard at the restaurant. "If Stephanie is actively planning to manipulate the property situation, we need to address it directly." "I don't want to evict them, Bill," I reiterated. "That's Thomas's home." "I understand that," he said patiently. "But there's a middle ground between doing nothing and throwing them out. We can clarify the legal situation while establishing boundaries that protect your interests and your relationships." Over the next 2 days, Bill and I prepared a comprehensive package of documents. First, a formal letter establishing the actual ownership of the property and the terms under which Jackson and Stephanie had been living there. Second, documentation of my financial contributions to their lives, including the reduced rent calculation showing exactly how much I had subsidized their housing over the past 2 years. Third, a proposed formal rental agreement that would clarify everyone's rights and responsibilities going forward. "This isn't about punishing them," Bill reminded me. "It's about bringing everything into the open, removing the possibility of manipulation through misinformation." While Bill handled the legal preparations, I reached out to my sister Laura for emotional support. 2 years older than me, and blunt as ever, Laura had been my rock during Amanda's illness and after her death. She lived in Arizona now, but we spoke weekly. She said, "What?" Laura's indignation crackled through the phone when I told her about being banned from Thomas's birthday party. "That's outrageous, Griffin. After everything you've done for them?" "I think there's more to it," I explained, sharing my discoveries about Stephanie's social media campaign and the overheard conversation about the house. Laura was silent for a moment. "You know, I never liked her. From the first time we met at the wedding, something felt off. Too perfect, too controlled. But this is beyond dislike. This is calculated manipulation. The question is what to do about it," I sighed. "I don't want to lose Jackson and Thomas over this." "You need to stand firm," Laura advised. "Not mean or vengeful, but firm. Establish boundaries that show you won't be manipulated or taken advantage of. If you roll over on this, it will only get worse." The next day, Laura flew in from Phoenix. Having her physical presence in my home was comforting in a way our phone calls couldn't match. She helped me process my anger, allowing me to vent my frustration and hurt without judgment. "You have every right to be angry," she said as we sat on my back porch, watching the sunset. "But you can't let that anger drive your decisions. Remember what Dad always said, anger clouds judgment faster than fog clouds vision." Our father's wisdom, as always, cut to the heart of the matter. I needed to approach this confrontation with clarity and compassion, not righteous indignation. Over the weekend, Laura helped me organize a small family meeting with our younger brother James and his wife Susan. I needed perspectives from people who knew me well, who could help me see any blind spots in my approach. "You've always been too generous," James said after I explained the situation. "Not just with money, but with forgiveness. You let people take advantage because you always want to see the best in them." "That's not a flaw," Susan interjected gently. "It's what makes Griffin who he is. But in this case, kindness without boundaries has created an unhealthy dynamic." Their insights helped me refine my approach. This wasn't about winning or punishing Stephanie. It was about resetting a relationship that had veered into unhealthy territory. On Monday, Bill and I had a final strategy session. We role-played various scenarios, with Bill taking the roles of Jackson and Stephanie, helping me prepare for different reactions. "What if Jackson sides with Stephanie completely?" I asked, voicing my deepest fear. "What if this pushes him away permanently?" Bill leaned back in his chair, considering. "That's a risk. But ask yourself this. If Jackson is willing to cut you out of his life because you clarified a legal and financial arrangement that was being misrepresented, was the relationship already lost?" It was a painful question to contemplate, but a necessary one. The possibility of losing Jackson completely hovered over every decision, yet continuing as things were, allowing myself to be marginalized and manipulated, wasn't sustainable either. That evening, alone in my study, I wrote a letter to Jackson. Not a legal document or a list of grievances, but a heartfelt expression of my love and my hopes for our relationship. I wrote about raising him after Amanda's death, about the pride I felt watching him become a man, an architect, a father. I acknowledged my imperfections as a parent and my genuine desire to be part of his and Thomas's lives. I didn't mention Stephanie directly or any of the specific issues we would be discussing. This was about the bond between father and son, a bond I believed I had to believe was strong enough to withstand the coming confrontation. After sealing the letter in an envelope, I spent time looking through old photo albums. Jackson at 3, sitting on my shoulders at the zoo. At 10, proudly displaying his first architectural drawing. At 18, in his cap and gown, arm around his mother who was already showing the effects of her first round of chemotherapy but smiling bravely for the camera. At 35, placing a ceremonial brick in the foundation of his first major building project. So many moments, so many memories, a lifetime of connection that couldn't be erased by one difficult period. I was placing the albums back on the shelf when my phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Margaret Wilson, Thomas's preschool teacher and an old family friend. Margaret had taught Jackson 25 years earlier and had stayed in touch over the years. "Griffin," she said, her voice concerned. "I hope I'm not overstepping, but something happened today that troubled me, and I felt I should tell you." "What is it, Margaret?" "Stephanie came in for a parent-teacher conference this morning. Afterward, she spoke to our director about updating Thomas's approved pickup list. She specifically mentioned that you should be prevented from picking up Thomas because you're, and I'm quoting here, mentally unstable and trying to interfere with Thomas's inheritance and family stability." I gripped the phone tighter. "She said that? To the school director?" "Yes, and she asked us to call the police if you ever tried to take Thomas from school." "Griffin, I've known you for decades. I know this can't be true, but the director has to take these claims seriously for liability reasons. I wanted to warn you." After thanking Margaret for her call, I sat in stunned silence. Stephanie's campaign against me had escalated to a new level of seriousness. She wasn't just excluding me from family events or bad-mouthing me to friends, she was now making formal allegations that could have legal repercussions. This final revelation strengthened my resolve. The confrontation couldn't wait any longer. It was time to clear the air, to bring the manipulation and misrepresentations into the light, to fight for my place in my son's and grandson's lives. I called Bill. "I'm ready. Let's do this tomorrow." "Are you sure?" he asked, hearing the determination in my voice. "Absolutely. It's been exactly 3 weeks since I was turned away from Thomas's birthday party. 3 weeks of silence and exclusion. It's time to end this." As I hung up, I felt a strange calm descend. The anxiety and hurt that had plagued me for months gave way to a quiet certainty. Whatever happened tomorrow, I would face it with dignity and truth. I would stand up for myself while leaving the door open for reconciliation. Most importantly, I would finally break the pattern of manipulation that had been poisoning our family relationships for too long. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. I was as ready as I would ever be. The morning dawned clear and crisp, autumn sunlight casting long shadows across my front yard as I prepared for the day ahead. Bill arrived at 10, carrying his weathered leather briefcase containing all our carefully prepared documents. "Ready?" he asked as we got into his car. "As I'll ever be," I replied. The letter to Jackson tucked securely in my jacket pocket. We arrived at the house on Maple Street precisely at 11, the house I owned. The house where my son and his family had been living for nearly 3 years. The house that had become the unexpected centerpiece of our family conflict. I knocked firmly on the door, my heart pounding despite my outward calm. Footsteps approached, and then Stephanie appeared, her expression shifting from neutral to hostile when she saw me standing beside Bill. "Griffin," she said coldly, "this isn't a good time. We didn't agree to a visit." "I'm afraid this couldn't wait, Stephanie," I replied evenly. "This is my attorney, Bill Carson. We need to speak with you and Jackson about some important matters." She tried to block the doorway. "Jackson's working in his home office. He has a deadline. Whatever this is, it can wait." "It cannot wait," Bill interjected, his professional demeanor unflappable. "This concerns the legal ownership and occupancy of this property. I strongly suggest you invite us in to discuss this matter privately, rather than on the doorstep." The mention of legal ownership caused a flicker of uncertainty in Stephanie's expression. She hesitated, then reluctantly stepped aside. "Fine, but keep it brief." The living room was exactly as I remembered it, though my family photos had been removed from the mantel, replaced by portraits of Stephanie's family. Thomas's toys were scattered across the floor, evidence of a happy 5-year-old's morning play. "I'll get Jackson," Stephanie said, disappearing down the hallway. Bill and I exchanged glances but remained silent. Moments later, Jackson appeared, looking confused and concerned, Stephanie close behind him. "Dad, what's going on? Why did you bring a lawyer to our house?" "Your house?" I repeated gently. "That's actually what we need to discuss." Bill opened his briefcase and removed a folder of documents. Mr. Williams, Mrs. Williams, I'm Bill Carson, representing Griffin Taylor. I've prepared some documents that clarify the current legal status of this property and the terms under which you have been occupying it. Jackson's confusion deepened. Legal status? Dad, what is this about? I took a deep breath. Jackson, there seems to be some misunderstanding about the house. When I offered it to you at reduced rent, that's exactly what it was, a rental arrangement. I still own this property outright. There was never any transfer of ownership, partial or otherwise. Stephanie's face paled slightly, but she recovered quickly. That's ridiculous. You gave us this house as a gift to help with Thomas. I offered you reduced rent as a gift, I corrected. There's a significant difference. Bill handed Jackson the property deed and tax records. These documents confirm Mr. Taylor's full legal ownership. There has never been any transfer of title or equity to either of you. Jackson studied the papers, his expression moving from confusion to shock. I thought, when you said it was to help us. You thought what, Jackson? I asked gently. That I had given you the house? He looked up, embarrassed. Not exactly. I thought we were building equity, that it was some kind of rent-to-own arrangement. That was never discussed, I said. And if that misconception has caused tension, I apologize for not being clearer. But that's why we're here today, to clear up any misunderstandings. Stephanie interjected, her voice sharp. So you brought a lawyer to what? Evict us? Throw your own son and grandson out on the street? No one is being evicted, Bill stated firmly. Mr. Taylor wants to establish clear, formal terms for your continued occupancy of the property. I leaned forward. I have never wanted anything but the best for you, Jackson and Thomas, but recent events have made it necessary to formalize our arrangement. Recent events? Jackson repeated. What are you talking about? This was the moment of truth. I had to address the elephant in the room without allowing anger to control the conversation. 3 weeks ago, I was turned away from my own grandson's birthday party. I was told I'm not family anymore. I've been systematically excluded from your lives, while simultaneously being expected to provide financial support through this housing arrangement. That's not sustainable or healthy for any of us. Stephanie stood abruptly. This is absurd. You're twisting everything. You've been overbearing and controlling, using your money to try to run our lives. I remained calm. Is that why you told Thomas's preschool that I'm mentally unstable and should be prevented from picking him up? Is that why you've been telling your colleagues that you plan to have the house transferred to your names before Thomas starts school, to protect against my unpredictable behavior? Jackson's head snapped toward Stephanie. You did what? When did this happen? Stephanie faltered momentarily. I was just protecting our family. Griffin has been acting erratically, showing up unannounced, trying to buy Thomas's affection with expensive gifts. Showing up unannounced? I questioned. Every visit was scheduled and confirmed with you. As for the gifts, is it unusual for a grandfather to want to give his grandson nice things? Bill gently redirected the conversation. Let's focus on the matter at hand. Mr. Taylor has prepared a formal rental agreement that establishes clear terms for your continued occupancy of this property. The rent remains well below market rate, but the agreement formalizes the arrangement to protect everyone's interests. As Jackson reviewed the proposed agreement, I reached into my pocket and removed my phone. There's something else you should hear, Jackson. I played the recording Margaret had helped me make, a conversation she had witnessed between Stephanie and another parent at the preschool. Grandpa Griffin isn't really family like Grandma and Grandpa Davis. He just helps Mommy and Daddy with money sometimes. Real family doesn't need to be paid to be loved. Stephanie's voice, unmistakable, teaching my grandson that I wasn't real family. Jackson's face went pale, then flushed with anger. Is this true? He asked Stephanie. Did you really say this to Thomas? Stephanie's composure finally cracked. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. Your father is always there, always watching, judging how we raise Thomas, trying to recreate his relationship with you instead of letting us be our own family. So you decided to erase me from Thomas's life? I asked quietly. To tell him I'm not real family? To block me from his birthday and spread rumors about my mental stability? Jackson stood up, pacing the room. I had no idea any of this was happening. Dad, I swear, I never knew she told Thomas those things or contacted the school. The moment felt precarious, a family at the breaking point. But this confrontation wasn't about destroying relationships, it was about healing them through truth. "Jackson," I said gently, "I don't blame you. But I need you to understand what's been happening and why I felt I had to take this step. I've been systematically pushed out of your lives while still being expected to provide financial support. That's not a healthy dynamic for any of us, including Thomas." Something in my tone seemed to reach him. Jackson sat down heavily, running his hands through his hair in a gesture so like his mother's that it made my heart ache. "I've failed you, Dad," he said finally. "I didn't stand up for your place in our family. I let this situation develop because it was easier to go along with Stephanie than to confront the problems." His admission broke something open in the room. Stephanie, seeing her husband's distress, seemed to deflate. Her defiant posture collapsed, and for the first time, I glimpsed something vulnerable beneath her controlled exterior. "I never intended," she began, then stopped. "It wasn't supposed to become this." "What wasn't?" I asked. "This whole situation." She looked down at her hands. "At first, I just wanted to establish our independence, to make sure Jackson and I were making our own decisions about Thomas. But it escalated. Each step seemed justified at the time, but looking back, she trailed off, unable to continue. Bill, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, suggested he wait outside to give us privacy. After he left, the three of us sat in difficult silence for several moments. "Where do we go from here?" Jackson finally asked. I pulled the letter from my pocket and handed it to him. "This says everything I want you to know about how much you and Thomas mean to me. But in practical terms, I'm proposing a reset. A formal rental agreement that clarifies everyone's rights and responsibilities. Regular, scheduled time with Thomas that isn't constantly changed or canceled, and family counseling to address the underlying issues that brought us to this point." Stephanie looked up, surprised. "You're not going to evict us?" "That was never my intention," I said firmly. "This is Thomas's home. I would never disrupt his life that way. But I do need acknowledgement of the reality of our situation and respect for my place in this family." Jackson read my letter silently, his eyes growing damp. When he finished, he stood and embraced me for the first time in months. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I should have seen what was happening. I should have stopped it." Over his shoulder, I saw Stephanie watching us, her expression complex shame, resignation, and perhaps a glimmer of recognition that things needed to change. The next 2 hours were difficult but productive. We discussed specific incidents, misunderstandings, and hurt feelings. Stephanie eventually acknowledged her campaign to diminish my role in Thomas's life, admitting it stemmed from her own insecurities about family acceptance. Growing up with distant, critical parents had left her hypersensitive to perceived judgment and competition for Thomas's affection. "I felt like I had to prove I was a good mother," she confessed. "And when you were so involved, so good with Thomas, it made me feel inadequate somehow. I'm not excusing what I did, just trying to explain it." Her vulnerability was unexpected but welcome. For the first time, I saw Stephanie not as an adversary but as a wounded person whose actions, however harmful, came from a place of pain rather than malice. By late afternoon, we had established a framework for moving forward. I would maintain ownership of the house, with a formal rental agreement at the same reduced rate. Jackson committed to family counseling, with the first appointment already scheduled. Most importantly, we established regular, guaranteed time for me to spend with Thomas, including occasional overnight visits. The process wouldn't be simple or quick. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. But as I left that evening, the weight of months of rejection and hurt had begun to lift. There was a path forward now, illuminated by truth and bounded by mutual respect. 2 months later, we held a rescheduled birthday celebration for Thomas. Both families were present: Stephanie's parents, my sister Laura, and other relatives from both sides. The tension hadn't completely disappeared, but it had diminished significantly through our ongoing counseling sessions. In the backyard, I finally presented Thomas with the restored pedal car. His eyes widened with delight as I showed him how to operate it, guiding him on his first wobbly circuit around the yard. From the patio, I caught Stephanie watching us, and when our eyes met, she offered a small but genuine smile. The journey wasn't over. Stephanie was working on her issues in individual therapy, alongside our family sessions. Jackson was finding his voice, learning to balance his love for his wife with his responsibility to maintain healthy family boundaries. And I was learning too to express my needs directly, rather than through generosity alone, to recognize when my help might feel like interference. One evening, a month later, Jackson and I were working in the garage on a new project for Thomas, a miniature workbench where he could learn basic tools under supervision. As we measured and cut the wood, the familiar rhythm of working together brought back memories of teaching Jackson these same skills decades earlier. "Dad," Jackson said, as we took a break, "I want you to know something." "What happened?" "The whole situation with Stephanie. It taught me an important lesson about courage and compassion." "How so?" I asked, curious. "You stood up for yourself, enforced boundaries when they were needed, but you never stopped seeking reconciliation. You could have used your ownership of this house as a weapon, but instead, you used it as a tool to rebuild our family. That's real strength." His words touched me deeply. In that moment, I realized that our family crisis, painful as it had been, had created an opportunity for growth and deeper understanding on all sides. The house that had become a flashpoint for conflict was now a symbol of something else: the courage to speak truth, the power of facing problems directly, and the possibility of healing, even after profound betrayal. As we resumed our work, the simple act of building something together felt like a metaphor for what we were doing with our family, creating something sturdy and enduring, one careful step at a time. The most valuable lesson in all of this was one I hoped Thomas would someday understand. True family isn't defined by blood or legal documents alone, but by the willingness to stand firm in love, to speak truth with compassion, and to forgive without forgetting the boundaries that keep relationships healthy. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself with family members who were taking advantage of your generosity? How did you balance maintaining your boundaries with preserving important relationships? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to speak your truth with both courage and compassion.